Howdy, all of you delicious people. I'm here today to review The Express, the Ernie Davis story. So, with this film, I felt like this story was so great. I really enjoyed it, even though there were some points in this story also that made me uncomfortable. There were certain parts where I'm like, I don't think that I'm going to talk about this movie in the way of which that it's presented here. Like, I'm going to try and do it in a very vastly different way. So if I'm approaching it somewhere or in some way that eventually doesn't seem similar to the film, then that's just the way that I'm going to approach this. So going into this film, we of course have a Heisman Trophy history making movie that is to focus upon a guy named Ernie Davis and his life and him going on and eventually being this running back and going on and at some point going from high school to college to the NFL, and then towards the end of this movie tragedy strikes. But up until that point, we do have a story of triumph. We do have a story that is really compelling and a story that I enjoyed. I just really did. Really, there is some kind of content here that really just shows for a time period, and there could be some unsavory language at some points of this film, and there could be some moments that, especially in certain games and stuff like that, where I'm like, man, just the craziness of certain games that they go into, where bottles are being thrown and riots are almost to break out, fights are to be had between two teams, and I'm just like, wow, what a story. What a fascinating story. Really, I would have loved there to have eventually, because there's a whole wrestling, in the early years of wrestling, there is a bunch of wrestling stories about certain wrestling matches, having it to where there were so many bottles being thrown, and there was so many times where wrestlers had to kind of fight their way out of certain arenas after they were to go on and win or lose or whatever. And so I always thought that those would be kind of really fascinating or interesting stories. And cue us having a similar kind of thing here. I would I would honestly say that this movie may not focus enough on football, but there might be certain football times in the story that I might get confused on. So I'm going to try to hopefully correct myself if some mistake is to happen. But other than that, I enjoyed this movie, even though, again, there was some moments where I'm like, I don't think I ever want to rewatch this movie, just because it just makes me also just uncomfortable. So with that said, yeah, let's just go into spoilers about this one. Let's just go on and talk about this movie. And so, yeah, let's go into that double five time territory. Where can you go and see this film, this great film? Stars right now currently has this movie available. If you have the inability to watch Stars because you don't have the money to, I can give you a free option here. You can go onto Letter C Movies app through a Google search. You can hopefully search for that app, hopefully be able to download it, and be able to say that you can see whatever you'd like. You can also go onto a app hopefully called Fox HD Movies. You'll hopefully be able to find this through Google search, and it'll have whatever I say next, still search for those words. Because you might have a logo that says Fox HD Movies, but you'll have a title that'll say something different. It'll say Play 1080p HD Movies. You can also go on to a Google Play Store search the word TV Crush, and you'll find an app that has an HD Movies logo with the crown off to the side. So, with that said, let's just go into this double 5 time count territory, and let's just get into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about the W to spoil this movie. So, in the very beginning of this piece, we have Ernie, who is to get a collection of bottles by this railroad with his relative named Will. So Ernie and Will are to go on and get these bottles, and they're talking about, like, hey, could this be like a Coca-Cola bottle? Could it be a Budweiser bottle? We're not sure. So they go on and they collect all these bottles without labels on them, and we go on, and all of a sudden we have a number of kids just start to circle around them and saying, like, hey kid, give me those bottles. And we have Will, who immediately runs off, but Ernie's like, no, like, I'm not gonna give these up. So Ernie is to grab these bags and to run off with them, and Ernie is to bring back to Will these bags of these bottles, and he's like, okay, like cool or great. So we transition and have Ernie and his family with Pops going on and having them have dinner. And then Ernie, of course, to read the Bible. And he is struggling because, like, words sometimes just can't come out the way he wants them to. And Pops is telling him, like, hey, take your time. Like, as long as you need to, like, eventually you'll get there. So Ernie is to start to learn to read, and he's reading the Bible. So Ernie is to get really good at reading, or really, really well at reading. So we go on into this story, and so Ernie is to, like, it's like some time has passed. Ernie is eventually to go on and find that his mother is to come back in the fold, his mother named Marie, and she wants to kind of take Ernie off. And so Ernie is to go on and eventually try out for this football team. And so this football team is to get all these new uniforms, all these green shirts, but it seems that Ernie, as well as a number of other players, aren't getting jerseys. And the coach is to just tell these guys, is like, well, hey, like, you kids are to, like, stand out. So so you guys will, like, they'll figure out who you are. So so going into this film, we have Ernie that doesn't let this, like, let him down. Excuse me. So Ernie goes on to just continue to play football and do it well. And so when we get to having Ernie be in high school, we of course have Ben, who is having, like, Syracuse versus the Holy Cross. And, like, the first part of this movie takes place in 1949, and I think eventually, like, when it's Syracuse versus Holy Cross, it's 58, I believe. So the first match here, we start to realize that, like, Syracuse, like, things are going so well for them. So Ben is starting to look on and try to find possibly his next, like, player to go to, his next player to scout for. And so that leads Ben to go on and have, like, Roy and a number of his, like, his coaches are kind of showing him some reels about certain players. It's like, oh, well, like this guy, like, he has a C average, and Ben's like, this guy's lazy, this guy's this, I don't really care. Like, and so Ben, of course, is say it's like, well, what else do you got for me? And so they end up talking about Ernie Davis, and they end up like saying his stats. And Ben is like, well, why are we looking at this guy? And they're like, well, there's a possible reason for that. So Ben goes on and is to look at some tape, and it's like, well, hey, this guy can run really well. I want him. Let's get him. Let's go on and let's have him try to like be on our team. So so we have a guy named Jim Brown. Jim Brown is to go on and be like suiting up to go on to play for the Chicago Browns, as he had formerly been uh, on the Syracuse team. So Jim Brown is to go on and have all these like press guys swarming around him, having them all go on and be like, oh my oh my god, Jim Brown, like you've broken all these records and like you've done all these astonishing feats, and now you're going on to dress for the Cleveland Browns. How do you feel? And Jim Brown is like, well, you know what, this is, I'm paraphrasing here. And Jim Brown is like, well, that's great and all, but like, did I get the Heisman Trophy? No. And they're like, whoa. And he's like, hey, like I know like where my place is in the world. Like, and I'm paraphrasing. But Jim is just like, well, like that's fine that I didn't get it, but like he let everybody know that he should have. So Jim Brown goes on to play with Cleveland, and Ben is to kind of rope him in on like, hey Jim, can you please, like Ben is to like plead with Jim to just kind of help him out, um, to try and go on and probably talk to Ernie to get him interested in Syracuse. And like Ben and Jim like have butted heads in the past, but like Jim is willing to help out Ben here. So at first we go on and we have both Jim and Ben who meet Ernie at of course this high school that he's at. And so they go on and they talk to him, and so Ernie is rattling off every Jim Brown stat and stuff like that, because Ernie, of course, is to say that my mother's a big fan of Jim Brown, and that like Ernie is to have like a picture of Jackie Robinson on his wall. So we have, of course, Jim and Ernie that are playing like lacrosse, and so they're throwing this like lacrosse ball back and forth after they go on and eat dinner with Ernie's family. And Ben is to mention how like he has like a wife and a daughter, neither one of them ever asked for like his opinion on things. And so we go on into this story, and so they're throwing the lacrosse back and forth, and Ernie's like, well, hey, like what is to be the one thing that's to kind of convince me to go to Syracuse? And Jim tells Ernie, it's like, well, hey, with all the times that we, like me and Ben had both butted heads, like he's like the best coach. Like if you run fast, he'll make you faster. If he thinks that you're not like a good athlete, he'll make you a better one, and so on and so forth. So we have Pops and we have Ben talking, and like there kind of is that conversation. It's like, well, like, hey, like with the way that Ernie technically is, it's like, well, hey, what are you gonna do for Ernie? Like how are things really going to change? So we go on, and so queuing us up to having Ernie be interested in going on and playing for Syracuse. And so Ernie is to meet with some of the players, and immediately he is to make a friend named Jack Buckley, was one of the players also. And Ernie goes on and starts meeting with a bunch of the guys, and so they're like, well, hey, I'm gonna keep your your jersey clean all year, and this and that. And so it's like, oh, okay, like, uh-huh. So Ernie goes on and plays for this team, and he's doing really well. And so we have in this story that uh, I'm trying to keep everything straight here. We have it at one moment where Ernie, within this story, at some point is to lose Pops, and Pops is to, I guess, die um, within this story. And so Ernie is to make his way back home to bury Pops. And Davis is to mention that this guy had spent like so many years, I guess, mining and being underground, that it's kind of like sad to kind of put him that way. But so they end up burying this guy, and so it seems that Ernie is to have to mourn on his own time, and they, like, even at like the end of practices, like Ernie's just bawling his eyes out because of the loss of Pops. That was to kind of really be his motivator, just like, hey man, just keep on, like, just take it at your own time, take it at your own pace. So at some point, Ernie and Will are to go on to this NAACP meeting, and they're talking about a boycott. And Will is telling Ernie, it's like, well, hey, like, you need to go on and do something more than what you're doing. You need to do more than just run the ball. Like, because Ernie is just kind of hesitant about doing this boycott or going on and protesting or anything like that. And Will's like, you need to do something more than just like college and whatever. You need to make some kind of like impression. You need to go on and do something. So Ernie is to go on, and he's starting to get really interested in girls and in college. And so Ben is to kind of pull him aside and tell him, it's like, well, hey, like, what I'm trying to tell you is like, hey, like, I'm trying to like protect your best interest, to tell you that, like, hey, you might have like a girl like at home, maybe you should focus on that, instead of going off and like looking at all these college women and so on and so forth. So Jack is to, of course, tell Ernie that it's like, hey, like, we've all gotten that speech, and so like you should really go on and like just kind of like protect yourself and just mainly like focus on football. But at some point, Ernie does go on and find a woman called Sarah Ward, and they do go on, and like the first time they really meet is both of them are at this kind of club, and they meet these girls, and like the girls are asking for some order, and they're like, hey, we're not waiters. And they're like, yeah, I get it, it's a joke. So they go off and they dance, and both of these two fall in love. And so like we kind of forget to focus on much with those two characters. So we go on, and football. So we, of course, have Ernie doing really well. But then again, we also have him bumping into certain characters where he has to really work through some things with. There's a guy named Bob Lunder that is to just consistently be on Ernie, and is to consistently uh, like either give him crap or is just kind of like, hey man, like, I'm coming for you kind of thing. And so they consistently like hit one another far too hard for this being practice, and they go on and they're even like fighting one another on the football field, in the locker room, fighting all the time. So we go on into this story, and so Ernie at one point eventually, like, things are to smooth over with Bob, as it seems that uh, like eventually, like, it just gets to the point where Bob is like, "Hey, do your job, 44," and all of a sudden he does do his job, and then Bob's like, "Oh, okay, all right," like, and so, like, the first time we notice, like, Ernie is all of a sudden, like, bleeding from his nose after this locker room fight, and he touches his hand. He's like, "It's like, this is blood." So, and then he thinks nothing of it. So he continues to go on and play in college, and so we have at one point where there's this one match where when this team goes to this certain state, they're going on and they're throwing bottles at the team, and Ben is telling everybody, like, "Hey, keep your helmets on no matter what, because we don't want somebody to get hit with bottles, and we're just trying to, like, protect you guys." So they're going on, and everybody's putting their helmet on, and so it seems that at this one state, we have it where it seems that Ernie can't go on and score a touchdown during this football game. And so we, of course, have Ben who's telling Ernie, it's like, well, like, that's the rules down here. That's the way things are down here. And so Ernie is to finally just get frustrated and is to finally tell the coach, it's like, well, like, is this their rules or is this your rules too? And Ben just gets so, like, frustrated and just so, like, well, yeah, like, Ernie is technically right. So Ben is to send Ernie out there for a play, and then Ernie just stays out there. And they're just like, okay, just let him go. So Ernie is to go on, and of course he is to try as much as possible to get touchdowns at this state, and so that just kind of aggravates people more and more. So we go on, and we have, like, at a lot of towns, we just worry that there's going to be some, like, riot that breaks out, or someone's going to get, like, killed or something like that during these matches, and it's getting crazy. So we go on, and these guys are doing really well. They're, like, smoking the other team. Like, it's getting to the point of it being like 30 something to nothing almost, or it's to be almost like a shutout game for most of these. Plus, Ben is to come up with this strategy by, like, changing the formation to make it think that they're all going to one side, but if anything, they're actually going to the opposite side. They're going to go to the weaker side because everybody's thinking, like, oh, they're going to go to the right, and instead they're going to go to the left. Just kind of changing things and kind of confusing people to where the other team doesn't know what formation that these guys are going with, and they're very confused. So Ben is to figure out a way to outsmart the other team, and, like, that's how they just continue to win. And so we go on into this story, and we have at one point where Ernie is to go on and get this, like, hamstring injury, and really we have Ben who's just like, well, hey, like, we're gonna really baby this injury because we should, because, like, this, like, we need this guy. But it seems like they continue to just put Ernie out there anyways so they can go on and try to win these games. So we go on, and we have it to where they're doing so well in all these matches that Ben is to say, it's like, well, like, we're possibly going to be able to go into these bowl matches, these certain kind of bowls, and, like, who do you guys want to face? Do you guys want to face Texas, who's, like, the best, or do you want to just kind of play the other team? and everybody's like, yeah, like we want to face Texas. Like everybody wants to like face the best team, and Ben is like, like I knew that's who they would pick. So, and this of course is the Texas Longhorns. So hopefully for me, I'm not going to get like very confused about which team is which, because we go on here and there's certain times where certain people are to of course want to specifically take out Ernie here, and there's a whole matchup when people are to know about Ernie's like hamstring injury, and so they're hitting him after the fact. They're going after him like after the whistle blows, and the refs aren't calling any flags whatsoever. If anything, they're kind of tempted to just call Ernie unsportsmanlike conduct, because even though Ernie is trying to say like, "Hey man, like he did this to me," and like they're just so tempted to just throw flags that aren't legitimate flags, or when you think they are going to throw something for the defense, instead they just say like offense, like holding, and it's like, wow, okay. So we go on and like things are going so horribly awry that there even gets to a point when within like the last like Texas match, we go on and we have them like doing like this brawl, like that is almost to take up to almost halftime. And so Ben is telling Ernie in this last match that he's like, "Hey, like I think I'm gonna have you just sit out for the rest of this game to just nurse that injury, because like we're very unsure if you can even run at this point." And because of all like the punishment that Ernie has like gone on to like just having throughout all these games. So they go on, and so Ben is just letting this play out, and it seems that the Texas side is to go on and start winning, and they have the Syracuse that is just up by a point. So Ernie has decided to just go back on the field and want to play anyways, and Ben is like, "Are you sure about this? Like, come on, like, are you sure you can even run?" And Ernie's like, "Yes, I want to be back on the field." And so we go on, we have Ernie get back on the field, and everybody's like, "Yeah, like come on." So they go on and um they do win this game. They do end up going on and becoming these national champions, and everybody's to be getting these awards. But I guess the award ceremony that they're supposed to go to, they won't allow certain people to go in there. So they're just like, well, hey, we're just gonna do this award show somewhere freaking else. Like we're gonna go to this barbecue place, because like they had it before where when the team was to go off and was to get certain like living arrangements for them to play at certain states, certain players were to go on in certain other hotels that weren't like the best living arrangements, but that's how it was during that time period. So uh like I think I also want to mention about, like I don't think I mentioned about the NCAA thing. So at one point, like I think this is after the whole moment when, or this is before the whole moment when Ernie is to go on and want to try to uh, get those touchdowns in a town that won't accept it, where Will is taking, uh, of course, Ernie to this NCAA meeting where they're talking about boycott. I don't know if I mentioned this or not. So, like, Ernie is talking to Davis about that whole thing and saying, like, hey, you need to do more than just, like, go on and run with this football. You got to do, like, something that will like make your mark in this world kind of thing. So we have it where Ernie is to go on and win this championship, and he gets these trophies, and so he then goes on and is to, after all this, he goes on to play for the All American like practice team. So all of a sudden we go on and we have Ernie, who like is to just be playing very sluggish. You know, like, hey, this seems kind of weird that this guy is like playing very sluggish here, because Ernie is to have some time with Sarah, and while they're just kind of playing around with one another in this bed, all of a sudden Ernie is to start to bleed from his nose. And we of course had one doctor was checking on Ernie before, asking him, it's like, hey, like, have you been sick, son? And Ernie's like, well, no, like, I've been fine. So all of a sudden we find out that that of course Ernie is to go to this all-American practice, and while he's playing, all of a sudden he like falls over, and he's starting to see like stars and all this stuff, and they're asking him like, hey, like, how many fingers am I holding up? So they go on and they are to, of course, have Ernie go off and kind of check into him, and they can't really exactly pin down what's wrong with him. So we have Ernie that is to be up for this Heisman Trophy, and he has two other competitors besides him that are up for this award, and he goes on and he gets it. And so he ends up like talking about like Will and Pops and Sarah and his mother, and he like thanks all of his family. And then he goes on and talks about Ben and like how much of a great coach he was and everything like that. And so we have eventually Ernie, who tries out for the Cleveland Browns training camp, and he's going through that to just kind of see if he can go on and play here. But like, it just seems like he's just not healthy enough to where one of the guys here is to have to go on and tell Art Model is to go on and tell Ernie here, it's like, well, hey, we can't clear you to go on and like play. We just can't. So come to find out, Ernie is to finally figure out more and more. He goes to these doctors and tries to figure out how to get medically cleared. He ends up finding out within 1962 that he has leukemia, and he's doing a press conference telling everybody this. So we have Ernie going on and saying that like, hey, like, I'm gonna go on and I'm gonna fight this thing, and I'm gonna turn around and go back on to play with the Chicago Browns, and like everybody's kind of like behind me on this, and they're like wanting to like fight with me to have this all just kind of be a thing where I can just kind of beat. So we then like turn around and have Ernie Davis, who can't go on into a football field and play, but instead he is to go on to the Cleveland Stadium in 1962 to like dress for a game and just kind of walk out there and just kind of hold his helmet up high and like just kind of feel the crowd and everything like that, but he can't actually play. So we also had a moment where Ernie was to go on and have some reporter want to just hear his story, and like Ben is to also want to use Ernie as a person to be just like Jim, to go on and convince a player to to go on and play for Syracuse. So Ernie goes on and is to, like, just like he was, meet up with this guy who's Floyd Little, and Floyd Little does the exact same thing that Ernie did to Jim Brown, and so Floyd Little is kind of rattling off all these stats about Ernie Brown, or Ernie Davis, my bad. So we go on and we have Ernie and we have Floyd, who's kind of walking, and so Floyd is saying, like, well, like, in all honesty, like, I am kind of interested in wanting to play with Notre Dame. So, like, what can you convince me to want to go on and play for Syracuse? And Ernie is to randomly find a bottle that has no label. And I was like, oh my god, like, they use that analogy, like, to, like, be full circle here. And I thought that that was so beautiful. And so Ernie goes on and takes this bottle without a label and is to give to Floyd and say, like, hey, like, when you see this bottle, what do you see? Like, what kind of bottle was it? And Floyd is like, I don't know. Like, it could have been a Coke bottle, it could have been a Budweiser bottle, it could have been any bottle. That's the thing. That really, this is a bottle with no labels. And for Syracuse, like you're not going to go and ride a bench like you will in Notre Dame. Like, when you go to Syracuse, like, you're going to go on and, like, you're going to play there, and you're going to go on and, like, I'm sure, like, Ernie is to give the same speech that Jim was to give to him, convincing him. So Floyd Little does go on and decides to join up with Syracuse, and Ben is to talk to Ernie, and before he goes out there, to with all of his Cleveland Browns gear, and Ben is like, well, hey, wait a minute, like, what did you say to him to get him to want to go to Syracuse? And so at first, like, Ernie used to say, it's like, well, yeah, like if you want to come there and be lazy and you want to come in there to be this and that, and Ben's like, really, you piece of, and then Ernie's just like, and if you want to play with the best coach ever, like, then go on and um, work with Ben. So he's like, I thought so. So Ernie goes off in the field, does his, like, last his bow, and come to find out, we, like, find out a number of things of a number of players, where they went on and they played a number of different teams, or they played with certain teams and in the NFL, and that at some point Ben was to be inducted in the College Hall of Fame, and we also found out that Ernie was to pass away from leukemia at 23. So I'm like, oh my god, like, so, like, it's kind of nice that he was to get his story out, because he was to pass away at 23 years old. Oh my god. Yeah, what a story. But yeah, with that said, I think I'm going to have to get out of here, because I think that's all that I want to say in this one. I know there's probably a billion things that I probably didn't go thoroughly in depth about, or I just kind of, like, rushed through. But then there was also a lot of points where I was like, well, if I go on, like, I don't want to kind of mess up something or scramble something up. So at the end of the day, I think that's all I wanted to say about the Express. A very interesting story. So with that said, I'm going to get out of here. Like, hopefully everyone's kind of okay with how I approach this, because really looking at it, like, I'm not doing it in a very, like, overly specific manner, but in a way I'm just kind of going through and kind of telling the story from what all I can remember. So with that said, I'm going to get out of here. Bye, buddy. Bye, buddy.